Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. So much of life is dependent on our math skills, just like our language literacy skills. With this in mind, I'm really excited to be joined today by a great math specialist talking about what works in mathematics education. Susan Midlarsky is the author of The Art of Learning Math, a Manual for Success. Susan's going to be talking to us today all about relationships and how to help not only students, but families develop a relationship with math and how we can get away from this constant alienation that we often feel when it comes to math and learning math. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Susan, how did math coaching or math specifically become an area of interest to you in your practice as an educational consultant?
Thank you for asking that. Teaching is my second career. Prior to teaching, I was working at MIT in an IT capacity, although I also worked in global atmospheric pollution research. I really loved STEM, but I found my passion leading me into becoming a teacher. During my master's program, I'd had a full-time practicum at a wonderful progressive private school. When I was working with the students, they told me that my approach was more useful and more connected to them than they had experienced in the past, which was quite a compliment because there were some outstanding teachers there. When I went into my own full-time teaching classroom, I only had a certification for 1 through 6. So I went ahead and I got my 5 through 8 certification in math. It did land me a position in which I started doing more math-focused teaching. I was lucky that that school, the second year I was there, brought in Yoram Sagar, who was one of the people who brought Singapore math into this country and who developed the Sprint, which is a fluency activity many people are familiar with. I got firsthand experience of that and how to use the Singapore approaches, which are very research-based and very powerful, to reach students in a completely different way, which led their accomplishments and their understandings to be far more advanced than anything we had seen before. That then led me to being a leader in teaching math, and then being recruited to train teachers all around the country on Singapore math, which then led to my becoming a writer on Eureka Math. Each of those experiences led me to understand more, deepen, and get more connected into how does math learning actually happen? Because the way we were teaching before, it wasn't very research-based, it wasn't very well-informed, it was traditional. Going more into effective practices and fun and joy while being effective.
A lot of what you said there, I hope we can unpack in the sense that of how we can actually help our other educators to not only have this passion in teaching math, but to the point you were making, teach in a way that's going to actually have impact for students. Before we even talk about strategies and what is effective math learning, I'd like to just double back a little bit. Can we talk a little bit about why math instruction is so important?
In this culture, for many years, people have found it acceptable to say that they are innumerate, that they don't like math. So numeracy has gotten a short shrift as an importance in our culture, whereas in certain other cultures, you will find that if you claim a numeracy, they will look at you like you have two heads. It's one thing to say it's not your pleasure. It's another thing to say, I never learned, period.
How does having a good command of numeracy help us?
Great question. On certain very surface levels, it makes life more manageable. Those surface levels are not shallow, because they affect every aspect of life. Financial choices, credit cards, not opening credit cards, understanding the flow of your income and outgo, being able to make financial choices that lead you to more security in the long run. Financial choices, for example, what kind of loan to get on a big purchase such as a car or renting a home, what's upfront versus what's long term. Basic, on the surface, but important things that numeracy really helps with to have a more decent life. Then on a deeper level, it connects to the ability to understand patterns. Being able to watch, for example, news cycles or historical cycles or patterns of interaction between people, weather patterns. There's so many things that you start to understand on a deeper level when you have a different relationship with math. Fractal geometry, which is something where we see patterns that are repeated in nature. For example, a lightning strike, we only see the flash of it. Really, there's a gazillion branching tendrils that come out of it that go down to 1 electron wide and go into the ground, into the cloud, all of that. Well, it's just like the shape of a tree and its branches and its roots, or our blood vessels or our neurons. You see these patterns everywhere, or the fjord and certain kinds of agate. So like you start to see these patterns that show you how everything is connected on a deeper level. And that gives a different relationship, because math is one of the ways we can understand where we are and how we relate to the universe.
I like how, because I don't think we have talked about this much on the show yet, and that is math as relationships, math in terms of understanding patterns. And that is a big focus of your book. Can you take us through some of the ways that, for now, maybe teachers could be teaching those patterns in math to their students? And then even parents, how might parents help their children to understand that life is a series of patterns?
That's another great question. I'm going to answer that a little to the side to talk a little bit about the structure of the book, which in itself has its own pattern. The book itself is a handbook. It's a manual for success. Manuals are guidebooks. They're not encyclopedias. They don't have every detail in them. One of the things that it does is it covers in some detail all of the stages of life, from birth through adulthood, and how math relates to those different ages, what to expect at those ages, and how to manage success in those ages. For example, the birth to 2 age, there are certain practices to do to encourage the baby to have a nice foundation in numeracy, with tips and specific ideas of things to do. This is within understanding of what the neurology of that age is like. And so we look at the neurology of the different ages, and the brain itself has its own, mathematical patterns, which is amazing. What can we do to encourage strength and support at each age? At the end of each chapter, there are a set of bullet points with important practices of things to do to encourage that success. And if it's easier, and I know for a lot of people it is, you can start there. You can start with the bullet points and then go back into the chapter and read the parts you want. There are also a couple interludes in the book where it's a chance to pause and think about what would happen if there wasn't success at that age. For example, in chapter 4, the title is Interlude 1, Why Does Math Exist? And it's a chance to reflect about that question and make a relationship response to that in yourself. There's also opportunity at the end of each chapter, and in some cases at the end of sections in each chapter, to have a reflection. There's a reflective question, maybe after the bullet points, where you can reflect about your relationship with math. I'm very keen to be research-based and thoughtful in what I propose and explain, where if you're interested in learning more, developing more insight about a particular thing I say, anything from mindset to research studies on how learning high school math changes the brain for the better, you can read more about it.
That's wonderful. And I like the approach you're taking, one, looking at math and life stages. We talk about in literacy all the time about being lifelong readers and lifelong learners. So it really resonates with me what you're saying, Susan, about being lifelong math learners and how
Mhm.
your manual can really help folks to develop that curiosity over the length of their lives when it comes to numeracy. With that said, because this is a podcast that focuses mostly on K to 12 education, can you walk us through the school age years, some of what you feel at each stage, say maybe primary, middle, and high, students should be doing when it comes to developing their numeracy, or what adults working with those students should be doing?
To start with, the book is a useful handbook for teachers, especially for teachers who haven't had the benefit of a dated math training, a conceptual shifted approach to math towards one where meaning and why is emphasized as opposed to how. I will say that the Common Core progression of mathematical learning, which I do refer to in the book, are something that I find is a very good guideline and that I refer to a lot about what to expect at the different stages in the different strands or what should be benchmarks. With that said, the role the book takes is more to explain what that kind of teaching looks like. So, for example, what does counting development look like at early ages? What should we be looking for in preschool and kindergarten students? And then in first grade, if that's not there, for example, they're not able to subitize yet. And subitize is being able to look at a small amount of something, small number of something, up to 5 or 6, and just know how many there are without counting. If they don't have that, what are they missing? How do we remediate that so that they can then develop the stages needed to be able to build on it into the other skills that they will need in elementary school? I also devote quite a bit of time in the book to problem solving because learning to problem solve is one of the biggest keys to life and certainly develops in elementary school and throughout the rest of schooling. A strong problem solving ability is one of the things that will carry through as a skill throughout life, especially as we face more problems. And this is a different emphasis. So that's one of those evolutionary things in education, which has come with in the last 10, 15 years, that's really useful. Problem solving, rigorous problem solving is one of the things that many of us were not raised with in math class and serves everyone so well in a deeper level if it's not over scaffolded, if it's not oversimplified. Another focus that I look at in the book is there's a fairly hefty chapter on fractions and how those should look from early through later schooling, because it's one of those things that has traditionally been taught very procedurally. And when you bring the hands-on tools and the connections and the pictures and all of this, it changes it. And I've had students say to me directly, fractions used to be my least favorite part of math, and now they're my very favorite. Because when you turn it around, it makes sense and it actually becomes fun to work with, to learn something. But it's important that it's connected to meaning and not some magic formulas you have to memorize by the time you graduate.
Susan, you were saying some things specifically that I would love to tease out a little bit more because I think they would be helpful for the listeners on the podcast. And that is one, shifting towards rigorous problem solving. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what you mean by rigorous problem solving. And then you said that you spend a significant time in the book talking about fractions and teaching fractions. I'd love to parse out a little bit more some of the ways to do that. What's your take on those two specific things?
With rigor, I would say one of the key points is coming back to the zone of proximal development. We don't want to be saying rigor, oh, this is going to be, we're going to give a fifth grade question to a kindergartner. But we do want to give a challenge. We want to give them, the students, the opportunity to persevere and really try, and support them with scaffolds as needed, making sure they're equipped with the tools to be able to do it. I'm going to give a little story of when I was in the classroom and I was teaching a mixed age group of second and third graders. And I just read The Teaching Gap. One of the things that really struck me was an experiment where they took some eighth grade American students and some eighth grade Russian students, and they gave them, both groups, a math problem that was far too difficult for them. And they waited to see what would happen. And as you can imagine, the American students gave up after about 10 minutes, and the Russian students worked on it for hours. Regardless of the fact that neither group was necessarily able to solve it, there were different qualities of how they approached it. Now, they're going to get a lot more out of that perseverance, continuing to try. And when I told this story, because I read it when I was in this classroom, and I told this to my second and third graders, and I said, we're going to try being a little bit Russian. And I gave them a fraction problem. So I'm going to bring that into that.
Please.
They didn't know anything about. We were doing Singapore math, but we hadn't gotten to fractions. We didn't, they knew what a fraction was, but they didn't know how to find a fraction of a quantity. And it was a word problem about that. And we worked through a couple of different periods of math, and they got really close. So I gave them one other equivalent. We're using percentages, because the other thing I used to do was National Novel Reading Month in the classroom. And we had a chart where they would mark their progress with percentages. So we introduced percentages. So I told them, I think it was the equivalent of 3/4 in percentages. And with that one little fact, they were able to solve the problem. And they felt so accomplished. There's a lot of art and skill in being able to do this in the classroom. One of the importances is understanding the ZPD of the students you're working with, and making sure everyone has an opportunity to solve a question with a similar rigor, but different students may need different scaffolds. So for example, if you're doing a problem with fractions, you may need to give a fraction number line to some students, whereas others may not need it. When we're talking about students without dyscalculia, everyone should have a chance to achieve the same challenge, but we give them different ladders to achieve that equitable. So, and if it's translation or whatever it is that they need in order to overcome the learning barriers. So those are some of the ways I would say tackling rigorous problem solving. And there are some great curricula that offer that. And I'm not saying to do it without support. I'm saying doing it with the right types of support, and that can include peer support.
And in fact, it's interesting you're mentioning this, Susan, because we had on the show Peter Liljedahl earlier on in season 1, and he was really talking about how do we shift the I do, we do, you do to actually having kids grappling with the problem first. Full well that the students aren't necessarily going to get it, but yet how do we increase their curiosity? How do we increase their problem solving skills, as well as their skills in working together to solve a problem? Then go into the I do and the we do after you've already hooked the kids on trying to figure this problem out themselves. Susan, how might parents use this manual with their children?
Whether it's an adult who is working with or has a little one in their care, parent or grandparent, and they just want a really solid foundation in math. Or it can also be homeschooling parents who really want to do well by their children in math. This can help them reach that. I met a number of adults, including some in the classroom, who had math trauma. Whether they were traumatized because they were told they were a girl, so they couldn't be good in math, or they just had a horrible teacher. I've actually had teachers I've worked with who, when they had to teach math, they were fine in other subjects, but they would start to shake when it came to teaching math, and they needed some healing. It's not a therapeutic manual, but it is an opportunity for people to start that journey if that is the case. because it does offer reflection. It offers insight into mindset. Mindset is the new psychology of success. So often our mindset, our fixed mindset, our belief that math ability is genetic or heritable or whatever, all of that is barriers to our own success as adults. And that can then be transferred. If it's a math phobia or math trauma, that can be transferred onto the next generation. So it becomes generational trauma, which is not a good thing to have. It's something that we do have here in this country.
Susan, in addition to writing this book, you've been coaching in schools. What have been some of your success stories?
That's a great question. The book itself is a synthesis of everything I've learned over my years of coaching and tutoring and working with homeschooling and unschooling families and so on. I brought many of my experiences, and there are some stories in there as well. What has been very interesting is that there's a universal moment when you know you've succeeded, and it comes with a sound. Oh, or oh, aha, that kind of noise. And oftentimes that comes when I'm doing math with teachers. If we get a chance to sit down and do math ourselves together, and they themselves solve it in a new way that they never understood before, I know that worked for me. That helped to transform my teaching, and I've seen it help transform other people's teaching. The more we build small successes, the more people feel comfortable facing barriers and obstacles in themselves. Them simply being able to see new ways, as simple as ways to manage manipulatives in the classroom. I can't use manipulatives. I hear this fairly often. I can't use manipulatives because it turns into chaos. So we work on managing the manipulatives, and then it becomes a tool and an experience and a resource and a joy, because it's fun to play with things. It's fun to be hands-on. And you get that, a lot in the class, and you see the results in the assessments.
Are there specific strategies you're using that's getting to those aha moments?
I will say that one of the memorable times that there was a breakthrough was when I brought just one of the progression documents before they were all pulled into one to a group of teachers who were quite resistant about changing how they taught math. And I gave them that particular progression, numbers in base 10, and I had them go into grade groups so that they would then create their own easel paper, pulling highlights out for their colleagues to see. And then we did a gallery walk where they saw how things progressed from one grade to the next in that particular strand. And it opened their eyes to how this works and the importance of what comes before and what comes after. And this is one of the strengths that I learned years ago. I don't know if it's still true, but what I learned years ago is that Singaporean teachers are taught to teach a range of classes. They don't stay at one level. They don't stay stuck at one level. They move around. And that gives them more insight into what should be happening at each grade level so they can then differentiate more effectively. That was a PD full of, another thing I've done is rigorous problem solving with model drawing. And that's very often opened minds. Oh, so that's what they're talking about. That's what this means. Let me try working through this problem that way. Then you have more chance for the cortex to work through it.
And this is a slight aside, but I'm wondering, have you ever used the Achieve the Core coherence maps with your folks?
All the time. Also, I'm going to give a shout out to the Jeff Baum's interactive chart too, because it's the same content in a different format. The coherence map, I've been using that since it came out. I've been following Student Achievement Partners since they existed. They're wonderful. The map is referenced in my book. So that is something that's an interactive way of looking at the connections between the standards at each grade level and between grade levels. And it's really cool. It's got lots of features where you can zoom in and out, and you can kind of get a big picture or get details. And then they hyperlink and they keep adding to this, they keep updating this to illustrative mathematics tasks related to particular standards, to assessment items from different state assessments that align to those standards. There are many resources linked to the map as well. So we use that to investigate. It's one of the tools that can be used to unpack a standard, and also to look at how do we differentiate. If we have a child who's struggling with this particular set of skills at this grade level, what can we do to help that student? And we can go right into the map, look at the standard or standards that relate, and then zoom in backwards. And oftentimes now you can see at other grade levels the tasks that are connected to those grade levels.
And one other side note, since you're the expert on this, I'm really keen to get your opinion on it. We see a lot of new texts coming on the scene. I'm hearing more about IM, illustrative math. What is your thoughts, not on a specific curriculum, but what are your thoughts on what an effective curriculum should have in it when it comes to teaching math?
That's one of those things that keeps evolving as we learn more about how students learn math. I was a Eureka Math author, and at the time we were doing the best practices we knew. Later, other curricula came out that integrated other best practices that we didn't have. So one of the things that's really effective is 3-act math, and you can find that integrated into Envision now. Edreports.org has quite a good set of criteria to evaluate curriculum through, but certainly there should be a range of alignment to the standards that meet the progressions. I will say, although there are many different state standards now, the vast majority of them really are some variation of the Common Core standards, because those are research-based and they're development-based, and they were good. The New York State Next Gen standards are an evolution of those, a refinement. I think they're an improvement, in my own opinion. So they should have everything from fluency opportunities. It should incorporate learning theory. There should be an opportunity to revisit earlier learning. There should be an opportunity to open-ended problem solving. There should be supported protocols to encourage peer work in a variety of formats that a teacher is given the support to implement. There should be various types of assessment, including mid-class, just to see where the students are, and exit tickets, maybe entrance tickets. As possible, an integration with technology, certainly incorporating best practices, including the concrete representational abstract progression, the high levels of rigor, explicit standards for mathematical practice, and certainly universal design for learning and MLRs, the mathematical language routines, should be incorporated.
In addition to, I hope, people picking up your book, I think that is also going to be a golden nugget that I hope people take away from this episode, in terms of, all right, yes, it's about how do I improve my relationship to math, so that way then I'm in a better position to either teach my child or work with my child or teach my class. But equally interesting here, I think, was our discussion on which curricula out there is doing a better job than, say, the way you and I, Susan, might have been taught math, in creating a solid relationship and association with math right from the beginning.
I'd like to add something, though. Curriculum alone is never a solution I've found.
Of course.
Because a teacher who doesn't know how to teach in a different way isn't going to be able to teach in a different way, no matter how great the materials are. So as much as possible, having live training, modeling, even if it's by video, anything to give the teachers the tools to do something they've never seen before.
Exactly. Your strategy of gallery walk, when you were doing that example of having your teachers look at the different progressions, is a way, to your point, that you worked with your folks to get them to see things in a different way. So I totally agree that it isn't just the curriculum, but how you're teaching it and how you're providing it. Susan, is there anything that we haven't discussed about forming a positive relationship with math, being a lifelong math learner, teaching math? Anything you want our listeners to know further?
Well, one thing I'd like to say is I do have a self-paced online course on my website that people can take, which introduces some of the specific teaching methods in a video format for kindergarten through third grade. That's something that may be useful to some listeners. I also want to mention that my book received the honor of being a top 75 choice book. So American Library Association chose it among the top 75 books for community colleges.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I would love to speak with anyone who would like to about how I can support their community in math. SusanMidlarsky.com. I'll be around also doing events with my book. I would love to see you there.
Thank you so much for your time today, Susan. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.